And so welcome back to our third Code Untapped Tech Talk. How are you doing, Jay?
I'm good as always good.
Good, good. So I think today we're going to talk a little bit about working for big tech companies, big companies, and I think both you and I have had a fair bit of experience of this. And part of the reason is, we've been doing some recent polls, and we're working with Google at the moment, and we've been looking at what's the experience of working for a big business, and what's the experience of applying, right? And how does that impact people from diverse technology backgrounds, like most of our members and our cohorts and our followers. So I think, we talk a lot about the big companies, but I think you worked in Marconi, right? What was that like?
Oh, GC Marconi. Actually, that was my first tech role, so straight out of university, and it was interesting because it was the first time I really understood. What can I say? I really understood the perception I was giving off. Yeah, just by being who I am, big black guy with a bald head. Yeah, I was really, I was
I
really,
mean, we
really,
can laugh now, right?
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
at
yeah.
the
But I was always a big black guy with a bald head. So it
time.
was, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I was really aware of that. I think at GC Marconi, I was really aware of that, and in the working environment. And that's something. It's something I spoke on before, but I had to. Well, I didn't have to, but I felt at the time, and this is going back. This was like 1990, 1998. So I felt at the time that I needed to tone down sort of my personality, so that really people didn't. There were no sort of false perceptions made about who I was. Yeah, I
Mm,
felt. Yeah, and so that was an interesting experience, and it took me a number of years as to
right.
really feel comfortable in my own skin, yeah, and
Mm.
be able to sort of speak on my own terms, yeah, in meetings and so forth. Yeah, so that was an interesting experience. So what about you, Ez? How was your first experience?
Yeah, so my first experience working in a big company was Lehman Brothers, right?
Mhm.
And I joined there as a grad, and I worked there as a undergrad when I did my sandwich placement, my industrial placement at university. And I've got to be honest, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed my time there. And I'm a little bit different to you. I'm not a big black guy with a bald head. I was a slim, light-skinned guy with short hair, right? So quite different. But you know what? You still feel a level of other. You still feel a sense of, there aren't many people like me in this organization. This is a tech. We were part of the technology organization
Yeah.
within that business, and I think the scariest bit was the interview, that when I went in and had to, you know, for my first time speaking to a large company, go in an ill-fitting suit, black shirt, silver tie, which was poorly chosen, but it was all I had at the time, and walk across a trading floor to get interviewed. It was a terrifying experience. I mean, you don't see many people who look like you in
Mm,
that space. You start thinking, have I made a mistake,
mm.
right? But I recently, and this wasn't something we were going to talk about today, but I recently came across the term of light skin privilege,
Oh
right?
wow.
We often talk about white privilege, but there's a lot to say about colorism in the black community and the rest, and how people from light skin backgrounds can have a different experience and different lived experience to darker skinned individuals. So I think that's something that I'm becoming more aware of and thinking more about, and thinking about, what's my responsibilities as an individual, as a technology leader, as someone who's of African origin but of light skin. What advantages do I gain from that, as opposed to just the disadvantages I gain against the majority of this population, and how can I leverage those things to to support our community better? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, that's a really, really interesting point, actually. And I hadn't thought of your perception of that experience being different from mine. But
Mm,
I can see that it could be very, very different. Yeah. One of the things that you touched on there, which was different to my experience. I remember when I first when I first left uni and went to Marconi, in actual fact, when I left Marconi and actually went to my first sort of banking technology job
That
in
was Goldman's, wasn't it? Was it Goldman or Merrill?
Merrill's.
Merrill. Ah, okay.
So I did 6 years at Merrill's and then 4 years at Goldman's. But when I worked, even in my first couple of interviews, so my interview at GC Marconi and my interview as well at Merrill's, I was still very, what I would call green. I was still very naive. Yeah. And so actually I wasn't, and actually maybe that was to my benefit because I wasn't actually in the interviews, I was myself and I wasn't necessarily concerned about the image I was given across because I think I was so green. Yeah. And it's only as you got into for me, it was always like, oh, okay, so this is how I need to behave. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay. So that's something that was always grown on me as I've been in the job. I've sort of realized sort of the norms, the social norms that I need to conform to. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting because I'd say I agree with you. My fear, as it were, actually grew over time. Right. I remember when I was applying for roles at for my industrial placement year. Right. I applied to Sun Microsystems. I applied to IBM. I applied to Microsoft. I applied to Core Design, the game company. Not one of them gave me a role. Right. Not one of them. And I ended up working in the banking space. But even though I was nervous, I still felt confident in myself to apply for these things. And then when the opportunity came to work at Credit Suisse, I went for that as well. I had no concerns about doing that. But this is the thing, I was in Switzerland, and by this point, I'd been out there for about, I'd been working in the tech space for over 10 years. I was a very skilled Java, C# developer. I was working closely with traders, analysts, quants. I was working on global projects, global rollouts, all sorts of things. And I had a friend who was one of the recruiters for Google in Switzerland, and she said to me, "You should apply for Google. You should absolutely apply for Google, right? You'll be absolutely what they're looking for." And I remember thinking, that would be awesome, but are you crazy? Are you crazy? Google aren't going to want me. I'm not that kind of technologist that they want. And, that memory of applying to places like Microsoft, IBM, tech companies suddenly came flooding back. And I was just said to myself, no chance. I'd read all the stories, heard all the myths about, the application process, the interview process. And I just thought to myself, I'm just not good enough. I'm not good enough. There's no way they're gonna apply. They're gonna take me on, because you hear about this, like, multiple interviews that you have to go through, the type of technology questions that they're going to drill you on, and you have the sense that you have to know all the APIs inside out. You have to know every technology under the sun. You have to be able to basically regurgitate all the design patterns, the Gang of Four, the whole lot, inside and out. You have to have read refactoring and be able to apply it in any way possible. You've basically got to be the kind of engineer who could have written event-driven programming, that kind of thing, or domain-driven design. And I just thought to myself, I'm not that person, right? There's just no chance. And I don't know if that was to do with my race, my fear about being a mixed race guy, and am I good enough, or whether it was just I'm afraid that I'm not good enough as a technologist, or whether just the unconscious biases that affect yourself over time, that you get institutionalized into believing, even though no one's outwardly said to you you're not good enough. But have you been institutionalized over time to believe that you're not good enough? So yeah, that was fascinating. And we can touch on some of the stuff we've done since then that makes it a nonsense that I didn't apply, because I do believe there's some truth to the challenges of applying to these processes, and I think we will talk about that in a bit. But there's a lot of myth there as well, or at least there's truth behind the myth that people don't quite understand, right? And we'll touch on some of that in a moment. But what about you? What are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, I mean, So I'm slightly older than you, Ez. So
Only a little bit. Only a little.
just a little bit. So some of the organisations that you're referring to, I remember when I was starting out in my career. Amazon. It was it was there or thereabouts. It wasn't the name that it is now. I mean, Netflix didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist in the 90s. Google was just, people, "Oh, what's this Google? Oh, it's quite a good browser sort of thing." Yeah, it wasn't, so it was interesting that, and I was in my career, I've been more of a server side, what we call it, what you would traditionally be known as a server side developer. So, those sort of technologies like C++ and Java and a lot of, relational database type stuff as well. And a lot of the new companies, what I would call the new tech companies, they were really focused on the newer technologies. The mobile space, for instance, or the latest changes in the JavaScript related families of technologies, that sort of stuff, which I wasn't, to be honest, I didn't have that kind of background, so I would never have considered applying to those companies, even when I was, even when I'd left even when I'd left sort of like permanent employment and I was moving more into consultancy. And even in like when I was in Switzerland with you guys, I would never have considered applying to Google. Never. I just would have considered that my skill set wasn't right as well. So I know you're looking at it from a more, well, am I the right individual to fit into this organization? I'm actually looking at it from the point of view, does my technical skill set actually match up with what these organizations are doing in technology? Could I even, is the gap that I need to bridge to level myself up, is it just too big? And it's interesting because, as you, I agree with you, as now looking back, that's a nonsense, because it's really, and I know we're going to go into this more, we might as well do it now, actually.
Start talking about it.
I'll start talking about it. Really, what those companies require is you to have that developer's mindset. And we talk about that developer's mindset a lot. And it's the mindset of continuous learning and continuous self progression. And so you don't look at, well, I don't have the skill set now. It's like, well, actually, I'm learning that skill set. And actually, I'm learning that skill set because I'm building something. And that thing that I'm building has value. And so I will learn what I need to learn, to be able to provide that value in the service or solution that I'm providing. And so your skill set and what you ask of yourself changes as well. So that's interesting. So what are your thoughts on that, Is?
Well, I completely agree with you. I think it's all about the attitude and the aptitude to learn, and that's the phrase I like to think about. Do you have the technical knowledge to be able to learn new skills and apply the knowledge that you do have to a new space? And do you have the ability to adopt new technologies, new techniques to a new space based upon the information and the experiences that you already have? And I think this is really important, because if you think about it, we talk about, well, what the space that Google's in as a technology, but they're involved in health tech, they're involved in sporting technology, they're involved in fintech now, all sorts. We're financial technologists. How can we not qualify to work to be involved in Google, right? So it doesn't make sense. And that's a great thing about some of these big companies. They're involved in so many areas now that there is no specific skill set area that you had to have. I always felt like you had to be this deep tech data science expert who knows Python inside and out to be able to work for Google. But it's really interesting because I think there's some challenges with our community. We've touched on some of them ourselves, and we ran a few polls on our LinkedIn page, and one of them was, have you ever applied for a job at one of the big tech companies? And actually, the answer surprised me, but it was 64% of our community have applied to a job at one of these large communities, and
Which
that's
is
really
good.
fantastic, because I
Yeah,
thought it would be lower than that, to
yeah,
be
so did
honest.
I. Yeah.
Because whilst we technically have, I haven't applied for a very long time. I applied right at the beginning of my career, but not again since then. But a really interesting stat was, how many times have you applied for a role at a company? And we said, once, twice, three times, more than three times. And 63% of our audience said they'd only ever applied once for a role, right? And for most people say, well, why is that a problem? Well, the thing about that particular statistic is that it doesn't necessarily apply to some of these big technology companies, because what we found, especially as we talk to Google and spoken to other engineers, is that it's actually normal at a place like Google to not succeed on your first attempt, right? To get a rejection and to come back again later. For them, that rejection is a case of, you didn't get it this time, here's some feedback, try again, right? It's that kind of fail, learn, try again, iterate loop that actually is the heart of startups and pivoting and lean and agile that we talk about. But most of us don't apply that approach to job hunting. I can tell you now, I've never applied more than once to a job. And if I didn't get it, I didn't apply again. That was it, right?
And as the same is with me. If I don't get it the first time,
that's it.
Obviously
I'm out. Yeah, exactly. But that's if we apply it in the first place, right?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
This is the thing. And I think this is a major problem.
And as you're right, because individuals like us, we might disqualify ourselves before we've even tried. Yeah. And as you said, we get concerned about the level of scrutiny on our technical knowledge, or whether we're going to fit or whatever. But I know when I applied for Goldman's, I think I had 8 or 9 interviews to get that job. Now I would go through that, and I'd probably do that again, and I wouldn't feel anything. But going to Google, that's another.
Mate, my interview for Credit Suisse, I had to fly to Zurich to get have my interview, right? And I was fully willing to do that. I'm like, fine, I'll fly to Zurich. I'll have this interview. So I wouldn't apply for Google that was down the road.
Exactly. So there is something there where we need to really understand this, cognitive block that we are putting in place, which is stopping us from, applying for those things that, we could be well suited for. So it's good that you're bringing it up. And I think it's good that companies like Google are trying to say, right, actually, there is a journey to us. Yeah. And this is the pathway. And this is the expectation that, we will give you positive feedback in your interviews if you don't succeed the first time or the second time. Absolutely. With the view that you'll eventually get there. Yeah. And that's what we want. And it's that skill of retrying, what did you call it actually? Repeat, isn't it?
That iteration, that feedback.
That iteration cycle is a learning cycle. It's the thing you do in every skill that you want to try and develop, in every endeavor that you want to try and master. And you have to go through that cycle of actually trying, failing, realizing your mistake, correcting that mistake and trying again. That's in every endeavor. So it's something that, so again, like you said, it's something that actually, why don't you apply it to this space as well? If you're applying to this space, it's something that you do. It's something that every child does when they're learning to walk, when they're learning to talk. So why wouldn't you apply it? Why wouldn't you apply it as a learning technique in every aspect of your life? Yeah.
No, totally agree. So I think one of the key things there then is, we've touched on our own experiences, but I'd love us to think a bit about, those graduates and those who are newly reskilled, right? There's a lot of people out there right now are thinking about newly reskilling and have no experience. And, what do you think individuals like that should be thinking about doing if they're interested? We've talked about that whole kind of thought process that happens, which is the, should I do it? Would I do it? Oh, sorry, it was the would I do it? Can I do it? Should I do it? Approach, right? Where you think to yourself, would I do this? Yeah, that'd be absolutely great. Can I do it? Not so sure. Should I do it? No, I'm not going to. Right. So it's that For those people who are just breaking into the space and are interested in going to one of these large technology organizations, but like us, right, we're afraid to apply to them because they're afraid of the process. What would you say to them?
Well, I always go back to, so first of all, I'm going to, the journey for me, the journey to accomplish anything, yeah, meaningful is always hard. Yeah. So there is a level of commitment that you have to have. Yeah. So you have to be prepared to commit. So that's one thing. So I always, there's a phrase that I always use, is why, what, and how. Yeah.
Right.
So you always need to ask yourself, you need to go back to first principles and say, well, why am I doing this? Yeah. Is this something that is really important for me to do? And it has to be, because that's the thing that's going to get you up in the morning. That's the thing that's going to make you do that extra bit of, you know, that extra bit of study that you need to do, that extra bit of research that you need to do. You know, you need to have that why. Yeah. And then you need to understand what it is you want to do. So this requires actually a bit of a bit of self-development. So you have to look into yourself and you have to say, right, so you understand your why. You have to look around and say, right, what do I like and what am I good at? Yeah. And in this space, and is what I like and what I'm good at relevant to the particular role that I want that I want to get, or relevant to the particular project that I want to do with this organization. Yeah. And if those things align, then you know you're halfway there. And then it's the how. So the how is, what am I going to do on a day-to-day basis that moves me one step further to my goal? Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
And you've got to be particularly diligent about the how. So you've got to make lists. You've got to, you've got to document. You've got to record your progress through this. And I think that will help you. So definitely, you guys, you've got to understand your whys, your whats, and your hows. And it's fundamental to you moving forward, yeah, in the right
direction. Absolutely. I think, just to touch on it from my side, I think the why, what, how is brilliant. And we think about that in everything, whether it's projects we're working on, whether it's pitch decks that we're building, whether it's strategies, everything. We do that, take that same approach, right, every time. I think one of the key things I would say, though, is all about demystification, right? You need to immerse yourself in the space to remove the fear of it.
Definitely.
Right. And the best way to do that, you want to work for one of these technology companies, find people within your network who work for these technology companies, spend time with them, learn what it is they do, and maybe try and work on a few projects with them, right? Even if it's on the side, maybe it's a open source GitHub project, whatever it happens to be, but contribute and work around and with people who work in the space. Not only will you learn best practices, you'll understand the type of technologies they work with, you'll understand the way that they think about problems, and you'll get exposure not only to them, but they'll get exposure to you, right? And all of a sudden, you now become a known entity to that organization in some way, and that dramatically increases the odds of you getting involved in that organization. And with that in mind, I think we've touched a lot on what Google are doing, what we're doing, but we're actually taking a step forward to help our community with this particular issue, in that we've got a workshop with Google on the 4th of August, 6 p.m. And it's all about the coder's journey to Google, where we're going to have actual Google engineers who've been through this process, talking about and discussing their experiences of getting into Google, their trial and error, their iteration, their feedback loop that they've had to go through in order to get to that. So please, I encourage everyone, sign up. It's free, register, sign up to it, check it out. We'll be talking about some more about this in our future episodes. There will be links below this pointing you to it, but you can find out about it on our LinkedIn page, on our website, on our meetup group. Just look for Code Untapped and you'll find out about it. So that should be really interesting. I'm really excited, really looking forward to that one. So I think last thing, we have one more poll on our website, and this one is all about how many years experience do you think you need before you can apply to a large tech company? 2 years, 5 years, more than 5 years? I'm not gonna spoil it with my thoughts, Jay. Don't spoil it with yours. I'm sure we've both got thoughts around this, and we'll talk about it in our next poll. So I think with that, Jay, any final words from you for this week's episode?
Well, guys, until next time, just keep on coding.
Well, that's it from Jay, and that's it from me. It's been a pleasure. Speak to you next time.